Hands where I can see them, lady. On a quiet Georgetown street, a decorated federal judge was shoved against her own car, accused of stealing it, and humiliated as a crowd filmed every second. What that officer didn't know. His suspect was the woman leading the nation's police reform. This isn't just a story about one corrupt cop, it's about how arrogance met accountability, and how the truth refused to stay buried. If you believe justice matters, hit subscribe now and stay with us, because what happens next will shake everything you thought you knew about power. Hands where I can see them, lady. The shout split the damp Georgetown night like a blade slashing stone. On the slick cobblestone street, yellow streetlights broke into uneven pools across a black SUV that had just rolled to a stop. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out, her posture tall, deliberate, the kind of stance that told you she carried authority without needing to say it. Gray tailored suit, cropped hair, a steel-toned watch that caught no sparkle but drew the eye for its stillness. Judge Alicia Monroe shut the door, inhaled the roasted scent from the cafe across the street, and turned just as a police officer closed in. Captain Brian Keller didn't walk. He stormed forward with the swagger of a man convinced the ground itself belonged to him. License and registration. He didn't wait for an answer, just spun Alicia sideways and forced her hands against the hood. The cold metal soaked into her palms, the scent of paint and latex gloves mixing into a sharp memory she'd known all too many times. Footsteps on the sidewalk halted. Phones lifted. Screens lit up like fireflies. Officer, Alicia said evenly. This vehicle is mine. Keller let out a jagged laugh. Sure it is. And I'm the Chief Justice. The laugh wasn't for her. It was for the crowd, as if he were angling for the right camera shot. For a heartbeat thin as glass, Alicia weighed silence against explanation. Instead, she chose a third option, stillness. Not weakness, never weakness, but the calm of someone who had weathered storms and learned that silence could expose the other side more completely than words. If you check your system, she said, you'll see my name in 10 seconds. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. Keller zipped his glove with a sharp snap, the kind of sound that sent the crowd craning forward. A camera doesn't always record the truth. It records the feeling of truth. And tonight, the feeling tilted toward the story Keller wanted to perform. That same morning, Alicia had woken at 5:30 in her Virginia home. The hallway was lined with photographs, graduation gowns, handshakes with federal judges, her late husband's smile frozen in time, her teenage daughter Naomi at a piano. She brewed coffee, sweetened it once, then changed her mind and sweetened it less. On the fridge, a sticky note from Naomi. Don't forget my choppin' tonight. I want you clapping first, Mom. Alicia smiled and tucked the note into her wallet, where she kept things meant to be remembered, not spent. The morning news droned about new federal reform proposals. She clicked it off. She didn't need the commentary. She was one of the architects of those proposals. On her desk, thick files labeled evidence standards, civilian oversight mechanisms, implicit bias training curriculum. Each one was a bird, waiting to be released. Across town, Keller slammed his locker door. Another damn federal order about cameras. Desk jockeys don't know a thing about the street. On the inside of his locker were grainy photos of young black men in cuffs, blurred faces like trophies. His personnel file bulged with complaints, each one shelved, stalled, or lost by late afternoon. The city softened under autumn light. Alicia steered toward a community center, where she was scheduled to speak anonymously at a meeting about police reform. She drove her personal car. The anonymity was deliberate. Dispatch crackled across Keller's radio. Random body cam inspections. Today. He cursed it under his breath but flicked it on. The camera blinked awake like an unwilling eye. When Alicia parked in front of the cafe, patrons glanced up, then back down. Cities are quick learners. Trouble is avoided by minding your own cup. That was the moment the shout tore through the air. Hands where I can see them, lady. The sound landed square on the wet cobblestones, louder than it needed to be. Alicia laid her palms flat on the hood. Cold, the metallic tang triggered an odd memory surgical rooms she'd visited during oversight tours, though she was no doctor. License and registration, Keller barked. You can run it in your system, she answered, or I'll hand you my wallet. No need. He leaned into her car, blocking sight lines just long enough for a sleight of hand. When he came back up, he was holding a tiny bag of white powder. Well, he announced with a grin practiced over years. Cocaine, intent to distribute. Gotcha. Alicia looked straight into a phone lens. Her own face stared back at her from someone's live stream comm, almost severe. Record everything, she said clearly. Every word, every gesture. The truth has a way of arriving, even when you try to bury it. A second squad car pulled in. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene, the suit, the watch, the unflinching composure. This wasn't the way car thieves acted. What's going on, Captain? He asked quietly. Boosted car, bag of dope. Open and shut, Keller said, already savoring the story he'd spin later. Rodriguez stayed silent, but silence itself had a shape. It was the shape of doubt, of someone who saw more than he was supposed to. The cuffs clicked shut around Alicia's wrists, the metallic snap echoing into the phones filming every second. For the crowd, it was humiliation. For Alicia, it was a door closing, and another one, much larger, about to open. At the precinct, paper smelled like fresh toner. Keller strutted, repeating buzzwords like suspicious, non-compliant, probable cause. They didn't mean much, but on forms they built the kind of wall misconduct like to hide behind. Sergeant Williams typed her name into the system. Monroe, Alicia. He froze. Data populated across his monitor. United States District Judge, Chair National, Commission on Justice Reform. The sergeant's throat went dry. He glanced through the glass. Alicia sat upright, wrists raw but chin lifted, as if listening to distant music no one else could hear. The phone on his desk rang, sharp and urgent. A steady voice on the line. This is Deputy Attorney General Evelyn Ross. We understand you have Judge Alicia Monroe in custody. Put me through to whoever signed off on this arrest right now. Out in the parking lot, black SUVs with federal plates were already rolling in, engines still humming. Men and women in dark suits stepped out with the calm of people who knew time was theirs. Inside, Alicia checked her watch. She thought of Naomi at the piano, fingers trembling at the second chord. Alicia had told her once, a little tremor is just another kind of courage. The memory drew a small smile across her lips. When Commander Peterson entered with federal agents at his side, shame had already drained the color from his face. Judge Monroe, he said carefully, allow us to, you can start. She cut in, by taking off these cuffs. Her voice was steady as stone. The sergeant hurried to comply. The metal clinked open. The red marks on her wrists would fade, but the ache would not. Pain, Alicia thought, is the body's reminder that something once sat where it did not belong. She stood. Beyond the glass wall, the federal agents formed a silent line, a sentence waiting for its period. At the end of that sentence, the story would change its voice. And when it did, the men who thought they were narrators would learn what it meant to listen. The precinct had gone quiet in the way a church does when a prayer catches in someone's throat. Phones still rang, keyboards still clattered, but every sound felt muffled under the weight of what had just entered the room. Recognition. Judge Alicia Monroe. The name hung in the stale air like a verdict before it was spoken. Captain Keller didn't see it. He was too busy enjoying the echo of his own swagger. Got ourselves a big fish, he boasted to anyone within earshot. Boosted car, drugs in the seat, Mouthy suspect who thought she was smarter than me. Textbook arrest. He strutted past a cluster of younger officers, waiting for their nods of approval, waiting for someone to slap him on the back. No one did. Through the smoked glass of Commander Peterson's office, the silhouettes of federal agents loomed, sharp as cut steel. Peterson himself stood stiff behind his desk, the phone still in his hand, knuckles white. "Keller." Peterson barked. "In here, now Rodriguez, you too." The swagger faltered just a touch. Keller grinned anyway, straightening his uniform like a boxer stepping into the ring. "Probably wants a debrief for the file," he muttered to Rodriguez. "Biggest collar this precinct has seen all month." Rodriguez didn't answer. His stomach had been tightening ever since he saw the documents spill out of Monroe's briefcase letterhead that didn't belong on a criminal's passenger seat. He followed silently, the dread in his chest heavy as stone. Inside the office, the air was colder, as if the vents themselves had turned judgmental. Deputy Attorney General Evelyn Ross stood at Peterson's side, her black suit immaculate, her FBI badge glinting under fluorescent light. Her eyes locked on Keller the way a hawk fixes on prey. "Captain Keller," she said, her tone crisp as glass, "do you have any idea who you arrested tonight?" "Ma'am," Keller started, puffing his chest, "I apprehended a car thief in possession of narcotics. Woman claimed to be a judge, if you can believe it. Probably stole the ID from somebody's purse." "That woman," Ross cut in, her voice slicing through him, "is my colleague, Federal Judge Alicia Monroe, chair of the National Commission on Justice Reform. The person rewriting the very rules you are supposed to follow." The words landed like punches. For a moment, Keller just blinked. "That's no. That can't be." She was resisting. "Resisting what?" Ross snapped. "Resisting your prejudice, your arrogance? Or the little baggie of sugar you thought you could pass off as cocaine?" Keller's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His eyes darted to Peterson, to Rodriguez, to anyone who might throw him a lifeline. No one did. Peterson cleared his throat, voice heavy with shame. "Captain, remove your badge and your weapon. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending federal investigation." The room fell dead silent. Even Keller seemed to hear the finality in it. Slowly, stiffly, he unclipped his badge. The brass shield clinked on the desk with a sound that felt like a coffin lid closing. His service pistol followed with a dull thud. Ross didn't flinch. She turned to Peterson. "Where is Judge Monroe now?" "In holding cell 3, Peterson admitted, barely above a whisper. Ross's expression hardened. "Get her out of there, remove the cuffs, issue a formal apology." "Yes, ma'am." Peterson practically bolted. Minutes later, the holding cell door clanged open. Alicia looked up from the steel bench where she sat, wrists still marked from the cuffs. A sergeant entered, eyes downcast, fumbling with the key. "Judge Monroe," he said, voice shaking. I'm so sorry. This was a terrible mistake." "Not a mistake," Alicia corrected calmly, standing as the cuffs fell away. "A mistake is forgetting to lock your car. This was a choice. And choices have consequences." She stepped past him, back straight, every inch the judge she was. The corridor opened into Peterson's office, where Ross, Keller, and Rodriguez were waiting. Keller's face had gone pale. His earlier bravado drained into something brittle and small. Alicia paused in the doorway, letting the silence gather weight before she spoke. "Look at me, Captain." Keller's eyes flicked up, then down again. "Do you understand what happened here tonight?" Alicia asked, her voice steady, low, but carrying across the room like a gavel strike. "You didn't just humiliate me. You put the entire justice system on trial with your actions. And it failed in front of an audience holding cell phones." Keller's throat worked. "I didn't know who you were." "That's the problem," Alicia replied, her tone rising with conviction. "You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with dignity. You shouldn't need to see my title to follow proper procedure. Every assumption you made tonight about my car, my clothes, my right to exist on that street was based on one thing. She let the silence hang before finishing. The color of my skin. The words struck like thunder, reverberating through every corner of the office. Keller's lips trembled. What happens now? Ross stepped forward, her badge catching the light. What happens now is federal charges, civil rights violations, evidence tampering, false arrest. And when the cameras finish airing the footage, the entire country will know exactly who you are. Alicia didn't break eye contact with him. This isn't just about you, Captain. Tonight was about a system that allowed you to believe you. We're untouchable. That ends here. Outside the office, the murmur of the precinct grew louder. Officers whispered to one another, cell phones buzzing with news alerts already breaking. Federal SUVs idled at the curb. Reporters would be there within the hour. Alicia adjusted her jacket, the red marks on her wrists still faintly visible. She turned to Ross. We're not going to bury this. We're going to use it. Every arrest record, every complaint file, open them all. If the system is broken, then tonight is our case study. Ross nodded, her expression grim but resolute. It starts now. And in that instant, the power shifted. The hunted had become the hunter, and justice long delayed was finally in motion. The room was small, square, and merciless. Gray cinder block walls. A metal table scarred by years of fists, pens, and cigarette burns. A single camera blinked. Red in the corner. No windows. Just one door with a slot that clanged shut like punctuation. On one side sat Captain Brian Keller, no longer captain. Just inmate Keller, though no one had called him that yet. The orange jumpsuit sagged on his frame, his hair unkempt, stubble creeping across his jaw. His hands trembled as he picked at the cuticles around his thumbs, leaving faint smears of red. On the other side, Judge Alicia Monroe. She wasn't in robes tonight. She wore a dark blazer, simple pearl studs in her ears, her hair clipped neatly back. But authority clung to her like a second skin. The posture, the eyes calm, sharp, UNBLINK dot between them lay a thick file. The hum of the overhead light filled the silence until Alicia opened the file and slid the first sheet across. State your name and former occupation for the record. She said, her voice cool but deliberate. Keller swallowed. Brian Keller. Former captain, 5th Precinct. His voice was hoarse, cracking in places he couldn't patch. Good. Alicia leaned forward, lacing her fingers. Now let's establish something simple. Do you understand why you're here? Because I didn't know who you were, Keller stammered. If I had, Alicia cut him off. Stop, this isn't about me. This is about the people you targeted long before you saw my face. You would have treated a janitor the same way, or a teacher, or a college student. Isn't that true? Keller's eyes darted to the camera in the corner, then back down to the table. I was doing my job. The neighborhoods, Alicia repeated softly, her voice turning the word into a blade. Do you mean black neighborhoods? Silence. His Adam's apple BOBBED dot. She slid another document across the table. Mugshots, arrest. Reports, all with his signature at the bottom. 762 arrests in 5 years. 82% of them black men. Do the math, Mr. Keller. The city is 30% black. Explain the discrepancy. I went where the crime was. Really? Alicia tapped one sheet. Dr. Michael Thompson, cardiovascular surgeon. Arrested outside his own hospital after a 16-hour surgery. Accused of loitering. She pulled another page. Professor James Washington. Pulled over 17 times on his commute to Georgetown University. No citations issued, ever. Want me to keep going? Keller pressed his palms to his eyes. I made mistakes, okay? Everyone makes mistakes. These weren't mistakes. Alicia's voice hardened. This was a pattern. A system. You didn't stumble into it, you built it. And you got away with it because the system let you. She opened another folder, revealing photos of a baggie, the same one he had planted in her SUV. Forensics tags clung to it. Explain this, she said. Keller's breath hitched. I found it. No, Alicia snapped, sharp enough to echo. We have 12 camera angles showing you palming that bag from your belt. Forensics found your prints and no trace of drugs anywhere else in the vehicle. It wasn't cocaine, was it? It was sugar mixed with baking soda. Amateur, Mr. Keller. Almost insulting. His shoulders collapsed inward. He stared at the table, lips trembling. How many times? Alicia asked. Her voice was quiet now, deadly calm. How many times have you planted evidence? Keller said. Nothing. The hum of the light grew louder, filling the space like static. Answer me. Maybe, his voice cracked. Maybe a few. When I knew they were guilty but couldn't prove it. I was keeping drugs off the street. Alicia's eyes narrowed. You mean you appointed yourself judge and jury? Decided who was guilty based on skin color? And when the law couldn't back you, you manufactured evidence? That's not law enforcement. That's corruption in uniform. Keller's hands shook. Violently now. I didn't mean to hurt innocent people. You didn't mean to? Alicia leaned closer, her voice low but scorching. You handcuffed fathers in front of their children. You dragged doctors from their cars. You humiliated professors on their way home. You ripped apart trust in law enforcement. And you call that not meaning to? Her words hung heavy. Keller slumped deeper into his chair, as though gravity had finally claimed him. Alicia closed the file with a deliberate snap. This is bigger than you. You're one man. But what you did is a mirror of the system that allowed you to thrive. The country will see it. And they'll know what justice looks like when the mask slips. Keller's breathing quickened. Desperation cracked through. What if I cooperate? He blurted. What if I help you? I can name names. Other officers, others who do the same thing. Maybe not as bold, but they're out there. I can help you. Alicia studied him. She didn't blink. She didn't soften. Finally she stood, smoothing her blazer. Cooperation may influence your sentence, she said. But it won't erase the lives you damaged. It won't give back years stolen from men you framed. And it won't change the fact that tonight, you've become the best evidence we've ever had. She turned to the door. Before she opened it, she looked back one last time. Justice is patient, Mr. Keller, but it always arrives. For you, it just came wearing an orange jumpsuit. The door clanged shut behind her. The federal courthouse in Washington stood like a fortress of marble in memory. That morning, every bench, every gallery seat, even the steps outside were filled. Reporters jostled for position. Victims clutched folders of paperwork that weren't just files, but pieces of their lives. Families held one another's hands as if the touch itself might steady them through the storm. At the defense table sat Brian Keller, hollow-eyed, gaunt, his once proud posture reduced to a hunch. The orange of his jumpsuit glared against the polished wood, a color that screamed of failure and shame. He fiddled with a paper cup of water, as though it were the last thing tethering him to the present moment. At the prosecution's table, a team of federal attorneys sat beside Judge Alicia Monroe, who was not there as a victim, but as a witness. Her role was clear. She would not seek vengeance, only truth. The murmur in the courtroom quieted as Judge Patricia Williams entered, robes flowing like a tide. She struck the gavel once. Court is in session. United States versus Brian Keller. The indictment was long. Each charge read aloud like stones dropping into deep water. Civil rights violations, falsifying evidence, false arrest, conspiracy under color of law, obstruction of justice. With every count, Keller's shoulders seemed to shrink another inch. The prosecution laid out its case methodically, displaying body cam footage on a large screen. 12 angles of Keller palming a baggie. Civilian videos capturing his racial slurs, charts showing arrest disparities, complaint files, and dismissal rates. The numbers spoke with brutal clarity. This wasn't one bad night, it was a career built on prejudice. Victims took the stand. One after another. Dr. Michael Thompson, the surgeon, described being cuffed outside his hospital, forced to miss operations that cost patients precious hours. Professor James Washington recounted the humiliation of repeated traffic stops, the whispers among students who wondered if their mentor was a criminal. Attorney David Johnson held up a photograph of his twin daughters. They watched their father shoved against a wall because he matched a description. They're still in therapy. Tell me how you fixed that. Each testimony stacked like bricks, building a wall Keller couldn't scale. When it was Alicia's turn, the courtroom hushed. She walked to the witness stand with calm precision, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore her oath. The prosecutor's first question was simple. Judge Monroe, would you please describe the events of that night? Her voice was steady. I parked my vehicle outside a cafe. Captain Keller approached with hostility, demanded I place my hands on the hood, and proceeded to conduct a search. During that search, I observed him remove a baggie from his belt and place it beneath my driver's seat. When he displayed it to the crowd, he announced it as cocaine. It was later identified as sugar and baking soda. The prosecutor nodded. And did you resist arrest in any way? No, I complied with every order, despite knowing my rights. I chose compliance because resistance would have been used against me. Compliance did not save me from humiliation. The words struck like thunder. Compliance did not save me. The defense attorney tried to salvage something. He leaned on Keller's years of service, his commendations, his supposed instincts honed on the street. He argued Keller believed he was acting in good faith, that the body cam footage was being misinterpreted. But each attempt fell flat against the hard weight of evidence. Finally, Keller himself took the stand. His voice was weak, stripped of the bravado that once fueled him. I was trying to keep drugs off the street. Maybe I crossed lines, but I didn't mean for people to suffer. Alicia's gaze met his. For the first time, Keller looked away. After closing arguments, Judge Williams recessed. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their foreperson rose, hands trembling but firm. On all counts, we find the defendant guilty. The word reverberated through the chamber. Some victims gasped. Others wept openly. One man whispered, finally. Judge Williams delivered the sentence with deliberate clarity. Mr. Keller, in my 30 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a consistent abuse of authority. You did not merely enforce the law, you perverted it. You turned the badge into a weapon against the very citizens you swore to protect. For your crimes, you are sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release and ordered to pay restitution totaling $350,000 to your victims. You are permanently barred from any law enforcement position. The gavel struck. Justice, long delayed, landed with a single blow. Gasps rippled. Applause broke out despite the bailiff's shouts for order. In the gallery, Dr. Thompson wiped tears from his eyes. Professor Washington clutched the petition his students had once drafted in his defense. Attorney Johnson lifted his daughters into his lap, whispering, "It's over." Keller sat motionless, eyes glassy, as if the sentence hadn't landed. But it had. It had landed on him, on the system that enabled him, and on every officer who thought impunity was armor. As the courtroom emptied, Alicia lingered by the door. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Justice wasn't about triumph. It was about restoration. She turned to the victims gathered around her and said simply, "This is not the end. It's the beginning of repair." And outside, on the courthouse steps, the press was waiting. Cameras flashed. Microphones thrust forward. Alicia adjusted her blazer, stepped into the light, and began. Tonight proves one thing: accountability is possible. And accountability is where reform begins. The applause from the crowd rose like a wave, carrying her words into the city beyond. The cobblestone street in Georgetown looked no different than it had a year ago. Same cafe on the corner, same yellow lamps throwing uneven light across the sidewalk. But to Judge Alicia Monroe, everything felt transformed. Where she had once been shoved against her own SUV, there now stood a bronze plaque, mounted on a polished stone pedestal. She stepped closer, fingertips grazing the engraved words. Recognition of all victims of misconduct and the ongoing fight for justice and equality. People paused as they passed by, some to read, some to take pictures, some just to lay a hand on the plaque before moving on. A small boy, no more than 8, tugged his mother's sleeve and asked, "Mama, what happened here?" The mother leaned down, her voice soft but steady. A woman stood up for what was right, and because of her, things started to change. Alicia felt the boy's eyes on her as she turned away, smiling faintly. Inside the National Police Accountability Summit, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. The grand hall of the community center had been converted into a conference space, banners draped along the walls, building trust, ensuring justice, reforming together. Leaders from across the country filled the seats: police chiefs, civil rights attorneys, community organizers, legislators, even officers who had once been critics of reform, but had come to see its necessity. On the stage, data screens displayed progress: body camera compliance, 98% nationwide; use of force incidents, down 47%. Civilian complaint backlog, reduced by 62%. Bias recognition training, now mandatory for all new recruits. It was more than statistics, it was proof that reform was no longer just a theory. It was practice. Captain Daniel Rodriguez, once the young officer who had watched in dread as Keller planted false evidence, now stood at the podium as head of the Metropolitan Police Training Division. His uniform was crisp, his voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a long way to go. But tonight, I can say this: officers under my command are no longer afraid of accountability, they expect it. And our communities are beginning to trust us again." Applause rose, and Rodriguez stepped aside. Alicia was next. She walked to the podium slowly, deliberately. The weight of the past year pressed against her shoulders, but so did the strength of every survivor who had come forward. She looked out at the sea of faces, some weary, some hopeful, all watching. "When I was shoved against that car 1 year ago," she began, "I thought about my daughter. I thought about what it meant for her to see someone like me humiliated in public, treated as less than human, reduced to a suspect because of the color of my skin. I thought about how many mothers, fathers, daughters, and sons had lived that reality with no cameras, no crowd, no chance for vindication." She paused. The room was silent, hanging on every word. What happened that night was not unique. It was part of a pattern. But what came after, what we built together, is unique. We took humiliation and turned it into a case study. We took prejudice and turned it into policy. We took silence and turned it into a chorus that could not be ignored. Behind her, the screen shifted to display photos of victims who had testified. Dr. Thompson, smiling with his surgical team again. Professor Washington, walking across campus surrounded by students. Attorney Johnson with his daughters at a community event, their hands no longer trembling when police walked by. The real measure of reform, Alicia continued, is not the fall of one man. It is the rise of a system that refuses to repeat his actions. It is the commitment to rebuild trust. Not with speeches, but with daily practice. Her gaze swept the room. Justice doesn't happen in a courtroom alone. It happens when a community decides that silence is no longer an option. When ordinary people choose to bear witness. when we refused to look away. The applause that followed was not explosive, it was sustained, deep, carrying the weight of conviction. Later, as the summit dispersed and conversations carried into the night, Alicia slipped outside for a breath of cool air. She walked back toward the plaque. The boy from earlier was still there with his mother, reading the inscription once more. This time, he looked up at Alicia directly. His eyes held no fear, only curiosity. "Are you the lady?" Alicia crouched down so they were eye to eye. "I'm one of them," she said softly. "One of many. And so are you, if you choose to be." The boy grinned, as though he'd just been given permission to dream bigger than the street around. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "A text from Naomi. Saw your speech online. Proud of you, Mom. You turned something terrible into something good." Alicia looked back at the plaque, then at the boy, then at the city stretching beyond the lamps and cobblestones. The fight wasn't over, justice was never finished. But tonight, she knew one thing with certainty. The arc of the story had bent, and this time, it bent towards something better. She straightened, exhaled, and walked into the night, the courthouse. Steps were empty now, long after the cameras had packed up and the last questions had been asked. Washington's night sky pressed heavy with stars. You could almost but not quite see through the city haze. Judge Alicia Monroe stood alone, her coat wrapped tight against the wind. The year behind her felt both like a scar and a foundation. Painful to touch, but strong enough to build upon. She thought of the plaque on the cobblestone street. Of the boy who had asked, "Are you the lady?" Of Naomi's text glowing on her phone. She thought of every victim whose life had been bent by injustice, and every voice that had risen to say, "No more." And she realized something simple. Justice does not live in marble buildings or polished gavels. Justice lives in witnesses who refuse silence. It lives in neighbors who pull out phones, in jurors who say, "Guilty," without flinching, in children who look at the world and dare to believe it can be better. She turned toward the street, her breath clouding in the cold. Somewhere out there, another confrontation was brewing. Another voice would be silenced if no one chose to speak. But now at least, the country knew better. Now at least, they had seen what accountability looked like. Alicia smiled faintly, whispering into the night as though it were listening, "Never look away. Never stay silent. Because your witness is the first step to justice." 1 year later, the same street held a plaque not of shame, but of remembrance. Victims found their voices, reforms took root, and trust slowly began to grow again. Doesn't live in marble walls or shiny badges. Justice lives in us when we refuse to stay silent. If this story moved you, subscribe and join our community. Together, we'll keep telling the stories that prove change is not only possible, it's inevitable when good people demand it.